Welcome back to Preservation Travels with Lane and Kevin here at Our Restoration Nation. And today we're bringing you Maidwood.
The veranda across the 5-bay facade of the 2.5-story main block is formed by 6 Ionic columns which rise directly from the stylobate in the Greek temple pattern to a simple entablature with triangular pediment. A delicate woven balustrade borders the second-floor gallery, which appears to float between the columns and the front wall. Square pillars replace the columns in the rear veranda. A row of small rectangular windows set into the entablature on this elevation lights the attic story. Rectangular side lights and transoms frame the entrances, centered on the front and rear elevations. Flat-roofed passages link the main house with a rectangular southern and L-shaped northern wing. Both these one-story gabled roof sections repeat the corner pilasters, entablature, and pediment of the central block. Windows consist of double-hung sash, again flanked by louvered shutters. Bayou Lafourche, which Maidwood overlooks, runs through the heart of the Louisiana Sugar Bowl. There, during the first half of the 19th century, wealthy planters built handsomely and lived in luxury. Strongly influenced by the cosmopolitanism of the booming port city of New Orleans, their manor houses reflected little of the region's French Creole heritage. Maidwood, in fact, relates more to the architectural traditions of the Tidewater, Virginia area than of Bayou Lafourche, and stands today as a practical example of the adaptation of the wing pavilion plan to the needs of the Deep South. At the rear of the residence is a 1-story brick and cypress carriage house. A short distance beyond it lies the Pew Cemetery, where several generations of the family were interred. Near this plot stands the Elmfield Cottage, a 1-story frame structure moved from nearby Elmfield Plantation around 1975 to prevent its demolition. A Maidwood cottage probably existed earlier on the same site.
Maidwood is probably the finest example of true Greek Revival architecture in the Louisiana Valley. So I can't really discuss Maidwood with you without giving you the history of Greek Revival architecture. So let's dive into that before we get started inside.
Far too often people conflate the idea of a plantation home with a Greek Revival home, and nothing could be further from the truth. Greek Revival is a style of architecture that was popularized worldwide. In fact, in the United States alone, there are more Greek Revival structures from the period standing above the Mason-Dixon line than there are below. Plantation-style homes were often far more simple, plantation plain or I houses. So why is it that we associate Greek Revival homes with plantation homes? Well, in our culture, it's because of a little movie called Gone with the Wind that painted every plantation home as a grand mansion in the Greek Revival style. But the truth is that the Greek Revival style just happened to be the trendy home style when the Cotton Kingdom was at its height in the mid-19th century, from about 1833 to 1850-55. And why was that? Why had Greek Revival architecture not hit the West prior to that? Well, that's because of a little something called the Ottoman Empire, the second largest colonizing empire in the history of the world, second only to the Mongol Empire. The Ottoman Empire stretched across the West. It was an Islamic empire, and as such, it was not open to Western visitors from 1299 to 1929. So why did Greek Revival architecture have its renaissance in the mid-19th century, specifically around 1833? Well, that is because Greece fought its War of Independence from the Ottoman Empire from 1826 to 1829. And in 1829, the Greek people drove the Ottoman Empire out of Greece. That opened Greece to Western exploration. Western artists and architects were able to travel freely to Greece for the first time in almost 1,000 years. And what they saw there inspired them. And suddenly we see Greek influences in architecture, in art. It explodes into the Greek Revival period, and Greek Revival architecture becomes all the rage. And so it is not a reflection of plantation culture that creates Greek Revival architecture. Greek Revival architecture was merely the McMansion of its day, and we see it in Europe and here in the United States, North and South.
The history of Maidwood is, of course, fascinating, but can also be troubling when you take a look at any of the homes of this period. This home was built by the Pugh family and was part of a 10,000 acre plantation complex. Not all of them right here, of course, but the Pugh family owned 10,000 acres of plantation land in Louisiana, mostly sugarcane. The home was designed by Henry Howard and was built by materials sourced from the site. So cypress and pine from the site, bricks made right here on the Maidwood property. Now, some of the architectural features of this house that are so fascinating are the things that the Pugh family took into account when building Maidwood. They built this home for permanence. You have to remember, we're very, very close to the coast. This area is impacted by flooding and by hurricanes. So the foundation was dug 8 feet into the ground and built on brick foundations. The exterior walls of Maidwood are 24 inches thick brick. The interior walls are 18 inches thick of brick. And there are some clues to that we find here in this central hallway that I want to show you. First of all, we have these mop boards that appear to be faux marble, typical mop boards for the period that would have been made out of cypress or pine. But these are made of cast lime mortar, cement. These are actually masonry mop boards in this central hall, which is indicative of the weight that they would be holding for these 18-inch thick brick interior walls. One of the things that makes Maidwood fascinating to me as an architectural historian is all of the architectural details that are sort of thrown at this property. Of course, on the exterior, you have these incredible ionic columns that flank the front of the home. Then as we get inside, you have these extraordinary Corinthian columns that are here in this front hall. And then we have Doric columns represented throughout the house in other lesser places. The thing about Greek Revival architecture that normally we see when they're using the orders of architecture, the Doric, the Corinthian, the Ionic, we usually see one of the orders selected for each area of the home, or we have a lesser order and a higher order. So you'd have the higher order on the main floor, the lesser order on the second floor. Those rules are thrown out the window here at Maidwood, and you see all of the orders used throughout the house in same rooms, in same spaces. So it really does show a celebration of the architectural style throughout the house. In Maidwood, we have a lot of the original finishes extant, which is just priceless. You'll see all of the beautiful faux bois graining. It's oak faux bois graining. Interesting. On these doors, which would be actually cypress. Now, a lot of you are going to immediately start screaming about the painted wood that you're going to see throughout the house, because that's from a lack of knowledge, understanding the history of painted wood in American architecture. There was only a very brief time in American architecture where woodwork was left unpainted and finished, and this was not one of them. The earlier Federal period and the Greek Revival period, woodwork was always painted. It was either painted a solid color, usually a cream or a white, or it was painted faux bois to mimic another form of wood. That's because cypress and pine were plentiful. They were not expensive woods. So you took your cypress or pine, the floors are pine, the woodwork throughout the trim is cypress, and you painted them to look like a more expensive wood. In this instance, throughout the house, we have oak faux bois painting. I love the form that you can see. The Greek Revival forms are so clear in this house. You have the entablature architrave of the door frames. You'll see they're narrower at the top than they are at the bottom. That is following the Greek Revival style, giving that temple style. The shouldered surround is mimicked throughout the house. And interestingly enough, just a little personal side note, this is exactly the same style of trim that we have in our very own Hope Farm. You will, I hope, have noticed in the what would have been the family's parlor, the private parlor, the very simple fire surround. Greek Revival in design, but very, very simple wooden fire surround. This huge double parlor would have been used for entertaining. So this would have been your public space. You see the incredibly ornate plasterwork with the acanthus leaf design on the ceiling, this gorgeous cornicing with the dentil moldings. Again, beautiful surrounds for the pocket doors, but you see in here matching probably African black marble fireplace surrounds that are original to that 1840s period. Well, I have found the absolute perfect example to show you why early woods were painted. So pine is the hardest of the soft woods, and cypress is the softest of the hardwoods. That's hard to say back to back. But this is a pine mantle. It's a very common material that would have been used to create these beautiful pieces. But you can see the grain is very loose, very open. Even in this very ancient wood, this is not considered for the time period an attractive grain. And it shows very clearly that a less expensive, highly common type of wood was used to create this beautiful mantelpiece. So originally, the whole thing would have been painted to disguise the fact that this is pine. Same things with the doors. Those would have been cypress. Cypress was abundant and cheap, and so it's painted over to look like oak, which is not abundant and would have been very, very, very expensive to use in your building. Okay, Maidwood has hundreds of treasures, hundreds, more than we could ever tell you in one video. But one of the things, again, as a historian of things of this nature, something that I find absolutely priceless, to me, worth the price of buying this house, is we know the name of the artist who did all of the faux bois and faux marbre in this house, and that was Cornelius Hennessy. And we also know that Cornelius left his signature on every single one of the pieces that he applied his paintbrush to throughout Maidwood. One of the things that I absolutely love about Maidwood is the material culture that we see here, the decorative arts. I know a lot of you are going to be looking at this home and you're going to find the color usage very shocking because we tend to think of homes of this period in creams and whites, and nothing could be further from the truth. I'm standing in the ballroom of Maidwood. Can you just imagine the parties that took place in here? And the colors that we see in this space are very indicative of what would have been popular in the period. These walls are Prussian blue. Now, Prussian blue had the height of its popularity about a generation earlier. The ceilings are very close to a chrome yellow. The front private parlor is actually chrome yellow. Behind me, you can see Shields green represented. And in the room in front of me, we have an incredible rose. It would have been called a rose color, but it's closer to a salmon or a coral color. These are colors that were incredibly popular in the era. And the height of the decorative arts that you see in here, this layering and layering and layering of beautiful pieces, is completely appropriate to this Greek Revival style period. So I love not only the structure of Maidwood, but the way that we see the period really represented throughout the home. As I mentioned to you earlier, Maidwood was originally the centerpiece of 10,000 acres of plantations. That is not to say that there were 10,000 acres directly surrounding Maidwood that were plantations, sugar plantations. Maidwood itself right now sits on 18 acres. But obviously, homes of this magnitude, the wealth that was amassed using enslaved labor. While Maidwood was built by the Pugh family, the architect was Mr. Howard. The labor itself was probably done by enslaved labor. And one of the things we rarely see in properties of this age are extant enslaved quarters. Usually those are gone. They're not gone. They weren't removed out of shame. They weren't removed because they didn't want to look at them anymore. They didn't want to see them. They just crumbled. After the American Civil War, obviously, the economy of the South was completely decimated, and it was decimated for decades. It has yet to fully recover even from the impact of the Civil War and then the boll weevil and other things that happened after the American Civil War. So materials from dependencies, a multitude of dependencies. Once those dependencies were no longer valuable for their original purpose, those materials were taken, reused into the main structure to keep these houses up. So materials like cypress, pine from quarters for the enslaved. Once there were no longer enslaved people on this property, they would have been used to maintain and upkeep this house. Materials from a smokehouse, once refrigeration was invented, would have been used to maintain this home. So that's how we continuously lost our dependencies over time. We're very lucky with Maidwood that several of those dependencies still sit on this property. And not only did the dependencies still sit here, but there have been other historic structures moved from the area that were in danger to the 18 acres here at Maidwood. Well, thank you for joining us today on Preservation Travels with Lane and Kevin from incredible Maidwood. We hope you've enjoyed this once-in-a-lifetime look inside this landmark property. Now, Maidwood happens to be for sale. We are not real estate agents. We do not represent or guarantee Maidwood in any way. But if you are looking for a property with history like this, architectural details that are absolutely unmatched in the United States, and you think you might be the next caretaker of Maidwood, the Zillow link is in the description below. Join us next time on Preservation Travels with Lane and Kevin. Make sure you hit that like and subscribe button if you want to make sure that you don't miss any of our future incredible historic property tours. And join us in Natchez in March for our spring tour of homes. We'll see you next time.